with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
And I get the feeling you've been cheated.
It is Monday, January 13th, 2024. My name is Sam Seder. This is the five-time award-winning Majority Report 2025. Shoot. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Richard Seymour, writer, commentator, based in London, author of Disaster Nationalism, The Downfall of Liberal Civilization. Also on the program today, 24 dead, at least 15 missing, as LA fires continue to burn, with fears of returning rising wind. In D.C., Trump and the Republican Party to tie the California aid to debt ceiling vote, this to pave the way for Trump's tax cuts. Trump cabinet confirmation hearings start tomorrow. First up, Pete, don't ask the moms, Hegset. Incoming Trump team interrogating national security civil servants as to their loyalties in the Project 2025 plan execution. House Republicans teeing up cuts to Medicaid, Affordable Care Act, climate measures, anti-hunger programs. Why not? The Lakin Act vote will take place today in the Senate, likely to pass. And it appears as if the Supreme Court may uphold the TikTok ban.
Oh, congrats to Meta, your competitor, biggest competitor, gone.
Jack Smith resigns as the Department of Justice continues to push for the January 6th report release. And Biden extends a temporary protected status for 18 months for 1 million immigrants from Venezuela, Haiti, other countries. All this and more on today's Majority Report. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks so much for joining us. It is
Fun Day Monday.
Fun Day Monday.
Yes.
What happened, Emma?
I'm
Where
here.
is she?
There
she
I
is.
am.
Okay.
There I am.
Thanks for joining us at the beginning of the week. We are 7 days away from the inauguration of Donald Trump as
Again.
45th, 47th? What number is he?
He's 47.
47. Again, 45, then 47. And, or I guess he's still 45th. I don't know what it would be. But it's the 47th new presidency. And we're just, starting to gear up for it. It's going to be a very different era than the past 4 years. If you remember the 16 to 20, the pace of news was far more dramatic. There's a lot more stories. We got a lot more to get to. And the pace of destruction, of things is going to be far more dramatic, I think. Certainly at the beginning of the term, February of 2021, the Democrats, I don't know if there was any Republican votes, I think not, passed a reconciliation bill, the American Rescue Act, which provided all sorts of excellent policy progressions, if you will. Child tax credits, direct payments in that regard. Not a great way to provide extended health insurance, could have been an expansion of Medicare, but they paid for people's COBRA. There was extension of unemployment benefits. There was a whole host of benefits that were passed. And then, of course, most of those went away because, Manchin and Sinema, but I would suggest also Joe Biden thinking that he needed to return to some form of bipartisanship and inviting Republicans and then Sinema and Portman into the White House and dilly-dallying and giving time for those forces to build to oppose those things. Remember, Joe Manchin at one point was calling for a larger number than Bernie Sanders on that Build Back Better bill. And then at one point, I mean, the guy's not, I don't think he's a brainiac. He's smart enough to listen to the people who are going to give him money. And I don't just mean in terms of campaign cash. The guy's has been basically, it seems to me, some type of deferred compensation lobbyist for some of the worst actors in our country.
And we have a new version of that, and his name is John Fetterman.
We'll see. It certainly feels like it, but we'll see. He seems to be more of a cultural warrior. We'll see if that extends.
Certainly does to AIPAC money.
Yes, it does. But we got a lot to get to. Over the next couple of days, there's going to be a lot of hearings on the cabinet picks. We're going to do our best to cover most of those, or at least, highlights of those moments. It really feels like the Democrats are capitulating. We talked to Sita on Friday about those things. The sense that the Democrats are capitulating is extremely reminiscent of 2001, or I should say 2002, 3, 4, 5, 6. At that time, at least, you had 9/11 to sort of explain away why they were so cowed. Now it is unclear. There's something in the water. I don't know. There's no. It's not just a question of donor money. I don't think the donors feel strongly about immigration in one way or another. The Lake and Riley Act, I don't think their donors, their big money donors, have a vested interest in this besides that HB1 fight. And that's happening on the right as much as it is, if not more so, than amongst the Democrats. But we will get to all that soon. In the meantime, the most pressing thing, of course, is the massive amount of destruction that has taken place in the LA fires. Estimates now are north of $150 billion. You have at least 10,000 structures or more that have been destroyed. This is without even sort of contemplating the individual sort of suffering of families who have lost everything. And it ranges from, the most expensive houses in LA in Pacific Palisades to middle-class people, living in Altadena, and sort of everything in between. And LA, California is going to need just massive dollars in aid just to help people get back to, 85%, essentially. Nobody's going to come through this in a better position than they were 3 weeks ago. And on top of that, of course, we need billions upon billions upon billions upon billions of dollars to ready cities for the different unique challenges they will now face going forward. And we've already started to see this, but we are still blind to it. I've seen about half a dozen articles trying to parse whether the California Fire Department cuts were real and consequential in this. And it's quite clear, 17 million were cut, then 50 million were added. Some of the community programs are cut, but none of the training was, et cetera, et cetera. You could have dumped another $50 million, $100 million, and it would have probably made virtually no difference in terms of the city is just not prepared. You need to invest billions of dollars to create completely different infrastructure to support dealing with 9 months of no rain and 100-mile winds.
Yes.
That are knocking down. You need to bury every single power line instead of having ones that are above ground. You need to somehow figure out how you're going to get pumps to pump water up into the hills like in the Pacific Palisades.
And it's quite convenient, I think, that conservatives are trying to blame this on, in many ways, like city governance, as opposed to the overarching thing that we need to be taking away from this story is that these are climate criminals who have privatized the gains and socialized the losses of their extraction and are plunging us into an apocalyptic hellscape where now at least 24 people have died. And I just was listening to one of the fire chiefs or police chiefs saying, oh, that number is going to increase. I mean, there's unhoused people that have probably borne the brunt of this. The folks that are fighting these fires, incarcerated people making sometimes $5 to $10 a day.
Incarcerated youth in many cases.
It is, and we are so ill-equipped in so many ways to deal with what's coming for us. And this is a global problem, and it's a problem of capitalism.
And to be clear, the complete denial of climate change being real for decades now on the right has made it also impossible to have conversations about what we need to do to prepare for this. I mean, you've got states where the words climate change are not allowed to be used. For 4 years under Donald Trump, the words climate change were not allowed to be used. They were not allowed to be written in official reports.
Oklahoma's trying to ban renewables right now.
And so this is what we're dealing with. In the meantime, the Republicans are already trying to figure out how they can weaponize the need for government bailout, essentially, of California, right? I mean, there's $100 billion, I think, in federal disaster relief that was passed at under the Biden administration. But that's going to be, I don't think it's going to be enough. And so the Republicans have a problem. They want to extend tax cuts for the wealthy. They want to have, capital gains cut for small business. They want to give away the house, but they also want to pretend like they're cutting the deficit. They're going to cut hundreds of billions of dollars in things like support for hungry people or healthcare or climate defense mechanisms. So how do they do that? Well, they need to raise the debt ceiling. And they were going to put the debt ceiling into the reconciliation bill. One of two of them. Now they may do one. And if they put that debt ceiling raise into one of them, they're going to get some, essentially, Republicans who are going to say, I'm not going to vote for this. I'm a Freedom Caucus guy, and I can't vote for raising the debt ceiling. I've never done that. It's my brand. And they can only afford to lose one or two of those people. And so now the plan is, we can take the debt ceiling vote and take it out of the reconciliation bill, where Democrats could use it as some form of leverage, right? Like, if you take out this, you take out that, we'll help raise the debt ceiling because Republicans will be screwed without the debt ceiling raised. But they still want to be able to vote against it. So the new plan is, we'll tie California aid to the debt ceiling.
In addition to the tragedy on the ground, you're also seeing gross mismanagement in California by elected officials. And it's heartbreaking to hear the fire chief say that they've diverted all of this money away from the fire department to be used for social programs.
Pause it.
They were already.
Pause it. That is not what the fire chief said.
Yep.
In fact, the programs that got cut in the fire department have to do with equity and going around to communities. It's sort of the opposite, but go ahead.
This is Senator John Barrasso of Wyoming, by the way.
Money away from the fire department to be used for social programs when they were already stretched too thin. So yes, I expect there's going to be hearings, there's going to be requests of Congress. There can't be a blank check on this, however, because people want to make sure that as rebuilding occurs, as things go on in California, they have to be resilient so that these sorts of things can't happen again. And the policies of the liberal administration out there, I believe, have made these fires worse.
Do you expect, though, that Congress and Republicans will still help these Americans in need, even if they don't like their local politics and the party?
I expect that there will be strings attached to money that is ultimately approved, and it has to do with being ready the next time.
Oh my God!
Because this was
I can't even. First of all, I mean, it's just shocking to me that Brandon probably gets paid what she gets paid without you don't even listen to what's being said without asking these questions. Can you imagine? I don't know who would be the equivalent, Dick Durbin or somebody coming up and talking about those North Carolina floods and saying, you know what? I'm not sure. You know, they built these towns in places where the floods are going to happen. They should have had these highways. We're going to put some strings attached to it. Do you know the months of attacks that any Democratic senator ever said anything like that? Ever. It would be relentless.
Durbin's a bad example. This guy's from Wyoming. And as a North Dakotan, I can say a senator from Wyoming has nothing to offer a state as big as California in terms of how to deal with these giant budgets and fire and a giant metropolis. It's a joke that he gets asked about this.
There were more acres of wildfire in Texas last year than in California. You don't hear about it because people aren't living there in those parts of the state. I mean, so the idea that we have a system, understand, that can allow a Republican senator to go on national television on a broadcast network and say, we're going to put strings to this massive, massive climate change fuel disaster, and you hear nothing about it. Just even the concept. If any Democratic senator had ever said anything remotely like this,
remember Chris Christie? Remember when Christie embraced Obama because Obama decided, like, I'm not going to play politics with this Republican governor and I'll give him the aid he needs for Hurricane Sandy? The whole right freaked out about it, but you wouldn't find the equivalent on the left.
No, it's just absurd.
I'm interested to see how these 9 Republican members of Congress from California have what they have to say about this kind of thing, because that we talk about some of the potential cracks and how to put pressure on this administration that is a lot of folks are rolling over and caving to. It's the members of the House who voted for impeachment, and then also I think on this, Republican members from California.
All right. In a moment, we're going to be talking to Richard Seymour, writer and commentator based in London, author of Disaster Nationalism, The Downfall of Liberal Civilization. First, a couple of words from our sponsors. If you love footnotes, or some people don't love footnotes, and that's fine. But if you're into footnotes, if you're really into footnotes, GiveWell is an independent resource for highly rigorous, scrupulously honest charity research. They have pored over academic studies to help donors direct their funds to evidence-backed organizations that are saving and improving lives. In the process, they've collectively added thousands of footnotes and caveats to their reports. They literally have a, what do you call it? A vertical on their website of all the mistakes they've made in the past, 10, 15 years, when they've researched these charities. They're incredibly transparent. We forgot this report. We didn't include this, whatever it is. GiveWell has spent now over 17 years, I guess it's 17 years, researching charitable organizations, only directs funding to the few of the highest impact opportunities they found. Over 100,000 donors have used GiveWell to donate more than $2 billion. Rigorous evidence suggests these donations are going to save over 200,000 lives and improve the lives of millions more. GiveWell wants as many donors as possible to make informed decisions about high impact giving. You can find all their research, all their recommendations for free at their website. You can also make a tax-deductible donation to their recommended funds or charities. GiveWell does not take a cut at all. Boston Globe called GiveWell the gold standard for giving. Here are some examples. Bed nets to prevent malaria. It costs about $5 to provide one net. Nets reduce the number of malaria infections, and enough nets and large enough drop in infections can save a life in expectation. This is my favorite. Cash incentives for routine childhood vaccinations cost about $155 to vaccinate an infant. The funding provides cash transfers to incentivize caregivers to bring babies to clinics for routine childhood vaccinations, prevents diseases, reduces child mortality, and it's a direct payment to folks often living in extreme poverty. And all the research shows they know best how to deploy that money. Go to givewell.org, find out more, make a donation, select podcast, enter Majority Report. At the checkout, they'll know that you've heard about them from us. Again, that's givewell.org to donate or find out more. We will put that link in the podcast and YouTube descriptions. Also sponsoring the program today, Naked Wines. That's all it takes.
I was excited.
Yes.
Excited
Well,
about
I'll
this
tell you
sponsor.
something. I mean, I'm not going to encourage vices per se, but this would be a good way to spend your first year of the Trump years. I'm sure you've all had an experience where you walk into a wine store, have no idea what you're talking about. You're in a grocery store, you don't know, you're staring at the wine, you don't know what's good. That's what makes Naked Wines so great. Naked Wines is a service that directly connects you to the world's finest independent winemakers so you can get award-winning wine delivered straight to your door. Use the code MAJORITY for the code and the password at nakedwines.com and get their incredible deal of 6 bottles for just $39.99. The beauty about this, my sister used to work in the wine business. There's a lot of vineyards that have great wines, but don't have huge marketing budgets. And so you wouldn't know about them. That's where a Naked Wine comes in. I had a Tempranillo. I'm saying that wrong. It's like I think it's like a Portuguese or a Spanish wine. It's good. It's very good. I mean, I have a vague sense of what kind of wines I like, but I like them, red and spicy ones. But it's a wine I would have never found except for Naked Wines, and it was very reasonably priced. Naked Wines connects winemakers and wine drinkers directly. That allows the vineyard to your door delivery for up to 60% off what you would pay in a store. By cutting out the traditional retail middlemen, costs, and markups, winemakers can pass those savings on to you without skimping on quality. Naked Wines has been around for over 15 years. They fund about 90 independent winemakers around the world. There are no commitments. There are no membership fees. You can enjoy Naked Wines hassle-free. And don't forget, you can pause or cancel at any time. So just because you've got a trip coming up doesn't mean you can't enjoy Naked Wines before or after that much-needed vacation. Now is the time to join the Naked Wines community. Head to nakedwines.com/majority. Click Enter Voucher. Put in our code MAJORITY for both the code and the password for 6 bottles of wine, just $39.99 with shipping included. That's $100 off your first 6 bottles at nakedwines.com/majority. Use the code and password MAJORITY for 6 bottles of wine, $39.99. We'll put that whole explanation in the podcast and YouTube descriptions and at majority.fm. Quick break. Richard Seymour, writer and commentator based in London, author of Disaster Nationalism, The Downfall of Liberal Civilization. We are back. Sam Seder, Emma Vigeland on the Majority Report. It is a pleasure to welcome to the program Richard Seymour, writer, commentator based in London, author of Disaster Nationalism, The Downfall of Liberal Civilization. Richard, thanks so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Let's start first with just, I guess, the most obvious question, disaster nationalism. What is that, and why is it under your, I guess, your notion that it's sort of a proto-fascism?
Sure. Well, we live in a world which is not short of real disasters. You only have to look at Los Angeles at the moment, for example. Ecological disasters, economic disasters, wars, all that sort of thing. And I've noticed for a few years now, actually go back to the Tea Party movement, that there was an increasing emphasis on the right, the far right, on illusory, imaginary, hallucinated disasters, FEMA death camps, Obama's fake birth certificate, more recently, white genocide, great replacement, and in India, the fantasy of what's called the love jihad, where Muslim males allegedly seduce Hindu girls in order to attack the Hindu fabric of the nation. They're obsessed with imaginary disasters where there is actually a real disaster in front of them. And what I argue is that quite often there's a direct connection between the two. So, for example, you remember the wildfires in Oregon 2020. The most severe in decades, largely exacerbated by climate change. And this compounded a lot of really bad experiences locally over the last few years, from the credit crunch, rising rural poverty, destruction of local news, rising addiction. This is before the fentanyl crisis, alcoholism, suicide rates soaring, all of that stuff happening. And then this comes along. And there are people who think that it's just too weird. It's too much, too many fires. What's causing this? And they decide it's Antifa. They're setting fire. And they had been listening to rumors on YouTube for a long time telling them that there was an Antifa conspiracy. It was going to kill all the white conservative Christians. And they said, they looked at the COVID lockdown and they said, that's liberal tyranny. And they looked at the Black Lives Matter riots and protests and they said, that's the sedition. They're coming for us. They're burning down the cities. Now they're going to burn us down. And that rumor spread spontaneously. It's an apocalyptic rumor. It didn't require any support. Only after the fact did Donald Trump and local police big it up and spread it across social media networks. That's typical of the kind of process that we see already today. We can see this in the case of Los Angeles, where there are rumors that Mayor Bass cut funding on firefighters, which she did, but in order to spend on diversity and inclusion and so on, which she didn't. I mean, it was a general austerity program. So that's disaster nationalism. It's a way of turning a disaster, which is very difficult to deal with, abstract, remote, climate change, capitalism. You can't shoot these things, but Antifa, you can shoot. And then you can go and shoot at Black Lives Matter and stab them and use vehicular attacks. And then you can go to Congress or the Capitol building and try and string up the communists who you say are in charge. This is a very animating, exciting alternative to the common experience of going through a series of disasters, which is to feel demoralized, bludgeoned, incapable of action, apathetic, and so on. That's disaster nationalism. Why is it incipiently fascist? I simply want to say that clearly there are elements that are similar to the traditional experience of fascism. The racial violence, the yearning, the hungering for a dictatorship. You remember the QAnon fantasy was a storm, a day of reckoning. And they were going to round up all the leftists and the liberals and the Hollywood celebrities and the Democrats, put them in Guantanamo, have shootings, etc. It's a fascist fantasy. What they don't have yet is the kind of political or ideological maturity to realize any of these objectives. They tried with the January 6th insurrection. They tried a pseudo-insurrection in Brazil when Bolsonaro was defeated. There was the Reichsbürger plot in Germany. They don't have paramilitary movements. They don't have organized parties, except in India. India is a unique case. The violence that we see is largely networked, it's decentralized, and it happens stochastically. You'll get years of incitement and then something will blow up. A bit like the pogroms that we had in the UK over the summer. So I would say that there are elements of fascism congealing, forming, and these fascist elements are in coalition with the more traditional hard right.
Wait, before we get to the why on this, and I also actually want to go back to see, if we hadn't had elements of this in the States anyways, in the, in the context of like the John Birch Society and whatnot, but just to also give an example of this dynamic and the international, from our perspective, quality of it. And I may be mispronouncing this because I read it in your work, but the Gujarat fire and sort of subsequent like riots afterwards. Like, how does that provide another example or a template for this dynamic?
Yeah, I think it's the canary in the coal mine there, because what happened was that in the northern Indian state of Gujarat, the BJP, which is a hard right Hindu nationalist party, was in charge. And they were in trouble. They were going to lose the elections. They were plummeting in the polls. There had been an earthquake, a real disaster, the year before this fire on the train. The fire that happened on the train turns out to have been an accident, according to independent investigations. But local BJP leaders, activists, businessmen, and so on said, no, this was an attack by Muslims. They did this. They wanted to kill the Hindus on that train. This is genocide, and we're going to get them for it. So they organized a pogrom. And this is not unknown in India. There's been decades in which pogroms have often been used, communal violence, in order to rally a right-wing Hindu vote. But they went way further than ever before in this case, killing thousands of Muslims, cutting them to pieces, fire, acid, everything every enormity that you can think of, rape, murdering infants, everything, they did it. They had an ecstatic, carnivalesque few days of non-stop brutality. And then after that, the result was that the BJP's vote went up by 5%, and it went up most in those areas that, the violence had been worse. So this was one of the early examples of recent far-right history where they were able to show that collective violence is not an embarrassment, it's not an electoral problem, it's part of the sell, it's a unique selling point. It excites them, it animates them. Narendra Modi, who's now the Prime Minister of India, at the time he was the governor of the state of Gujarat, was going around the state doing Hindu pride rallies. And he was described by observers as having become a sex symbol. That was the kind of magnetism that he had because of this violence. So already you see elements of the kind of the ethno-nationalist violence, that's its relationship to electoral success, the decentralized way of doing violence, although there were quite centralized apparatuses at work, a lot of it was spontaneous. And then also the erotic fantasies. Quite a lot of today's far right, MRAs, incels, fantasies about child trafficking by the Democrats and Hollywood and all that sort of stuff. It's immersed in fantasies of extreme sexual evil, and against which, of course, they are armed. So this is one of the first examples where disaster nationalism, as I'm calling it, gives you something to take arms against, which, again, it's very exciting, but it doesn't solve anything because, like any symptom, it exists to avoid the solution.
How is this are we in your mind a new era of this? Has these eras happened before? Like the Reichstag fire sounds, sort of similar in some, at least in terms of this dynamic. This happens, we're going to blame it on the communists, and it gives us an excuse to sort of crack down. Maybe not the idea of pogroms. Certainly, we had that type of dynamic. In terms of the indigenous people in this country, like I say, the John Birch Society has trafficked in QAnon-like conspiracies 70 years ago. When you say that are we in just simply a new era of this sort of like cycling around? And why is this happening? Why is this era happening now, and why is it international?
So I would say a couple of things about that. First of all, I think there's always fascist elements in a democratic society. And in the United States in particular, I mean, I did my PhD thesis on anti-communism in the South during the civil rights movement, and there was elements of fascist organizing there for sure. You had these institutions called state sovereignty councils, which were like petty dictatorships. They could get anyone banned, anyone barred, and they basically worked in conjunction with white citizens councils and the clans and so on. So there's an incipient fascist network taking form there around the theme of anti-communism. The civil rights people are all communists. That's always been there, or versions of that have always been there. And I think, personally, I think as long as we live in a capitalist society, that's going to be a potential. There are massive differences, though, and I think this is really important. First of all, today's so-called disaster nationalism is not trying to overthrow democracy yet. It's an anti-liberal movement for sure, and it seeks to tilt the balance, constitutionally in favor of much more authoritarianism. But you haven't seen them try to crush democratic institutions. Rather, they claim to speak up for a very ethnically exclusionary, majoritarian version of democracy. So that's what they're trying to do. Second thing is they. As I said, they don't have the organization. Classical fascism emerged from thick civic society organization. Even, the American example I gave, I talked about white citizens councils, clans, and so on. You don't really have that today. In America, you have some militias, but really a lot of it is anomic. This is why you get lone wolf murderers, because there's a lack of organization on their side. And in fact, a lack of social behavior more generally. That's a trend that's been happening in America. I think India is a big exception where you do have something like a matured fascism coming into being, because you've got these civil society organizations like the RSS and so on, which and paramilitaries which do have deep roots in the society. But I think most of what we're seeing today is very isolated, and it's not very utopian. That's another distinction. Historically, fascism promised a kind of utopia. It claimed to be anti-capitalist. It claimed that it would do something radically new and different, and that was rooted in the colonial perspective. We're going to take some land, and we're going to turn it over to you and your family and your kids, and you're going to have a great existence. And there will be people there, say tens of millions of Russians, to be slaves for you. And your world would be a lot better. That was the utopian perspective. Doesn't have anything like that today. Today, it's a very defensive, white nationalist, bordered worldview. I shouldn't say white nationalist because globally that doesn't really play. Right. But it's very defensive, nationalist, bordered, and it's much more predicated on the organization and harnessing of aggression. Your life is not going to get much better, but you are going to get the chance to destroy a neighbor. And then one other difference, I mentioned anti-capitalism and so on. Today's far right is very vigorously pro-capitalist. They have internalized a lot of the ideas of what we call neoliberalism for the last 40 years. A lot of these far right movements are quite explicitly, overtly associated with the ideas of Hayek. And in fact, Quinn Slobodian's got a book on that coming out, which is, he's done the research on this. It's very insightful. So this is a very novel kind of phenomenon. And I really think if fascism does mature, and we do see a mature fascist threat, it will not look like a dress rehearsal of the 1920s and 1930s. We should look for differences.
Interesting.
And I just have a quick question about the nationalism piece, if you don't mind expanding on this. Just the idea that nationalism, for the most part, is a bad thing. But in say like anti-colonial movements, right? Nationalism has been deployed to kick out the colonizers, and that has a positive effect overall. But mostly what seems to characterize this version of nationalism is ethnic nationalism. And there is the utopian element of an imagined past and like make America great again, but it's one of ethnic purity, and it's mostly second or third order to crypto, take the chains off, scam as many people as you want, and grab what you can in this current moment, and it's on the backs of this group of people. Would it be fair to characterize it as ethnic in its core identity and not necessarily around a national identity in the ways that perhaps previous fascist movements did?
See, that really depends. I think traditionally fascism has been ethnic in its orientation or racial. I think if you listen to someone like Steve Bannon, he will claim it's got nothing to do with race, ethnicity. I stand up for African-American workers.
He just came out against Musk and Thiel and Slack as being South African racists, which, a broken clock is right twice a day. But
when he's right, he's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it does feel like posturing, more like a political posturing. He seems to be wielding that in a more like politically expedient way today. I think he just feels like he's on the outside.
Yeah, absolutely. And to be honest, I mean, I don't take him very seriously on this, but I do think that there are contradictions in today's far right on this axis of whether it's ethnicity or something else. I also think it's really important to say you're quite right that nationalism, there's no fixed meaning to nationalism. I mean, I give a thumbnail a sort of sketch of the history of nationalism in which I'm very negative about it. But historically, there have been nationalisms which have been articulated in a progressive, radical, egalitarian way. Irish nationalism, Palestinian nationalism, for example. There are two things that I would say about that, though. One is that historically, the most radical parts of those movements have sought to go beyond nationalism because they've always seen it as a kind of a trap. Like, for example, Indian radical post-colonial thinkers were very skeptical of Indian nationalism on the grounds that it basically articulated the prerogatives and perspectives of the Indian middle class and the incipient bourgeoisie rather than the majority. But also there was a critique, and I think thinkers like Paul Gilroy would make this point, that there's no hard barrier between civic nationalism and ethnic nationalism. And there's always a sense in which Michael Mann talks about this in his book on the dark side of democracy, where the demos can become the ethnos through a kind of distortion. So in moments of crisis, in moments of turmoil, people can become fixated with an ethnic idea of the nation state. So I agree we have to make those distinctions, only that I would add that they kind of break down at certain points. And also, some of the most progressive forms of like cultural nationalism, take, for example, negritude, Aimé Césaire. This, was a rebellious anti-colonial doctrine, but then it was also the official doctrine of the Duvalier dictatorship in Haiti. So I think we have to be wary of nationalism and its juxtaposition to the metaphysics of race.
All right, I just want to get back to the for a moment of like why now, because and how that matches up. You talk about the falling middle, and the sort of like at least in the context of this country, and I don't know how that sort of like analogizes with what's going on in India, for instance, because it sort of feels like it maybe headed in different directions. But, one of the things that we heard about Trump in 2016 was this about economic anxiety, and as opposed to economic deprivation, right? Like the difference between being, I'm upper middle class and I am not sure of my material status, or maybe I'm sure of my material status, but I'm not sure of my social status. To talk about that sort of whole, I guess, sort of it's amorphous on some level, the interplay between those things. But what role is that playing in this unique era?
Okay, so what I was able to find out, and this more or less applies across countries, it's not the particularly poor or left behind who are most likely to gravitate to this kind of resentful nationalism. The evidence suggests that it's people who've experienced a relative decline, a trajectory of class decline over some years. And, we saw that with the so-called insurrection in DC, where a lot of the participants were people who've been very rich They've done very well out of the boom years. And then since the credit crunch had been experiencing crisis after crisis, many of them going bankrupt and what have you. I certainly think that's the case with the established middle class in Brazil that rallied behind Bolsonaro, and to some extent in the Philippines. So there is, it's not so much about whether you're deprived. You could be working class, middle class, whatever. It's, do you feel threatened? And, this is not, there's no hard line here between, I know in America there's the debate over economic versus status anxiety. I pick examples from across the world to show that that's a kind of, to be honest, it's a kind of parochial debate. That division doesn't really play out. They're both part of the same thing. And
by saying they're both part of the same thing, is that it's whether it's material or status is not relevant, or is it that they are often sort of intertwined in some fashion?
They are intertwined and co-constitutive, like they produce one another. So, for example, take racism in America. That's what's usually meant by status anxiety. That is obviously a class phenomenon. It's not only a class phenomenon, but it is, if you want to look at who gets the worst jobs, who gets to shove to the bottom of every available pile, and who experiences the worst of class life, it's going to be African Americans, right? And that's true in most countries. Somebody is going to be at the bottom of the pile, and usually they'll be racialized, but their experience will also be a class experience. So they're part of the same thing. I think that the motives behind this have to do with the emotionally toxic consequences of failure and loss. Failure is really toxic in this day and age because we've had 40 years of neoliberalism in which we've been told if something goes wrong, basically you didn't handle your capital well in the marketplace. And what's more, the slope of inequality has become a lot steeper. So you've got a lot farther to fall. And then there's this culture of sadism. So we emulate winners. Donald Trump was a big winner for years. He was on The Apprentice. The libidinal high of his show was when he pointed at someone and said, "You're fired." And we're supposed to emulate that and worship that and admire that. But at the same time, culturally, there was a lot of scorn for people who lived on benefits, who had failed. Nobody wanted to be that person. And so if you put people in a situation where suddenly you might be part of ordinary, toiling, struggling humanity, and whatever distinction you've crafted for yourself in this world will be taken away from you, that's when you become dangerous. Now, that can lend itself to radical left-wing politics in some circumstances. But, historically, if you look at groups like, for example, the middle class in Germany around 1930, their terror was of joining the working class, who at that time were very poor. They didn't want to have anything to do with that. So I think the fear of being, of plunging into the abyss, of losing distinction is a big part of this. And just one last thing on that, this is another way in which economic and status anxiety are part of the same thing. You find a similar pattern with the fear of desegregation and the fear of gender norms being eroded. There's the idea that being, the richness of being is best defended by a heavily structured hierarchy in which everybody knows his place and everybody has his place. And if people start, crossing racial, gender, and class lines, then that's regarded or experienced as an impoverishment.
So, if I understand you correctly, the economic anxiety essentially is very quickly that itch is scratched by essentially going into a status anxiety, which ends up sort of addressing that itch on some level without it really threatening the economic hierarchy.
It doesn't. Yeah, exactly. It gives you a chance to restore your honor, your pride, as it were. Pride is a big word. Hindu pride, the Proud Boys, it comes up again and again. it gives you a chance to address your shamefulness and your experienced weakness by destroying a neighbor. And I think that's a big part of the sort of psychodynamics of what we're seeing in Gaza right now, where you've got 20-something-year-old men who are having a great time, apparently, according to their social media feeds, expunging the shame, the felt weakness from 7th of October. So, this is...
speak of that. Yeah. I mean, because you're talking specifically, too, in about, like, where you have, like, these images of both in terms of what we've seen out of Israeli soldiers going in there and proudly,
wearing the lingerie.
Proudly blowing up universities and then parading around in lingerie and, just children's toys and whatnot. Like, that is a way of just sort of like busting through the shame. Is that the theory? I mean, like, I mean, it's sort of classic overcompensation, I guess.
Seems to be, yeah. I mean, for what it's worth, I've been working on something about perpetrators, and I ended up looking into the material on Sierra Leone, Cambodia, where there have been these atrocities. And quite often what you find, there are all sorts of motivations, but one of them is that you get people who've been injured or damaged by society in some way, been made to feel weak. This is quite common with violent criminals too. And they expunge that by carrying out atrocities. But the paradox is that the more you kill, the more you're obliged to kill, because once you've tortured somebody or whatever, that in itself is shameful. Everybody knows this. Unless you've been raised in a completely different culture where these sorts of things aren't shameful, that stigma attaches itself to you. And the only way to manage that is to continue to kill. So, I mean, I don't ascribe, causal primacy to psychological motives. I do think we have to look at history and economics and so on. But I think, economic and political and historical forces ultimately work on us through our emotions and through our mental states, and we act on that basis. So, if the argument was, we have an economic crisis, recession, and that's turned people to the right. The question would be, why don't they turn to the left? Why don't they seek redistribution? Why don't they try and expropriate the expropriators, as they used to say? That would be a logical, rational thing to do. And in order to, understand that, you have to try and grapple with the raw emotions that we're all afflicted with every day.
Is it just an emotional turn at that moment when they're which I guess populist movement am I going to subscribe to in that moment? Is it just psychological, or also are there structural reasons? Because there's a strong incentive structure for the capitalist class to have people go one way versus the other way.
Absolutely. And look, for decades, the left has been defeated and hammered. The labor movement has been defeated and hammered. We've got an incipient sort of revival in recent years, but still fairly weak and fraught. So where are the opportunities to organize coming from? On the other hand, whose voices are you hearing? When you look at the mainstream media, they seem to, I think, in general, give much more salience and credibility to the concerns of the far right than the radical left. So there's that kind of incentive. But I think also fundamentally, it's partly also down to the destruction of our information ecologies, because behaving radically means getting to the root of things. It means thinking things through systematically and critically, and we don't really have much space for critical thought. We're bombarded and bludgeoned with ideas, very emotionally potent ideas, which we're never given the space to think through critically. And I think about this in terms of like social media. I spent way too much time on Twitter. You're bombarded with ideas, which in that format, there's no real space to think through critically. What does this mean? And not just, think through whatever ideas contained in a short tweet, but to think through the context, the historical situation, etc. There's so much information that's missing. And so you end up being bludgeoned into a kind of passive consent. But what's worse is that by retweeting, by sharing, by quote tweeting and so on, you feel like you have some sort of agency, when all that's happened is that you've agreed to become a relay for an idea that you haven't really thought about properly. So I think that's part of the situation we're in. So yeah, I agree. There's structural reasons, there's historical reasons, there's economic reasons. One thing that's worth bearing in mind, there are certain types of people in this world who are not very susceptible to the far right's message. One of them is people who are in trade unions. That's a useful thing to know. Another is people who are at the very bottom, people who are, whether they're racialized or whether they're the lowest end of the working class, they're the least interested. That's also useful to know. And also there seems to be a correlation with education. So people going through the higher education system, despite everything that's wrong with the higher education system, seem to come up with some sort of inoculation against those ideas. I know that's more complicated in America because you do have some graduates for Trump, but I'm talking general patterns here.
Why is that? Why? I mean, I can understand trade unionists. I think, although we have unionists in this country that I think are still sort of like attracted to the sort of the rights call. But why is it? As a college grad, I like to flatter myself by thinking like, okay, that's why I understand why maybe graduates are inoculated. But why would trade unionists and folks at the lowest income spectrum be inoculated in some way? And that doesn't necessarily mean that they see the threat per se, right? It's just that they're not necessarily as enticed by what this disaster nationalism offers.
Sure. So the evidence from Europe, for example, is that the unions, it really depends on how the union is organized, its prevailing ethos, and how effective it is. So unions are much less effective at inoculating people against fascism or far-right politics, racist politics, and so on, when they find that if they have been unable to prevent precarity, if they've been unable to prevent flexibilization, if you've got some groups of workers who are better off than others, then those groups of workers who are slightly better off will be minded to see themselves as having a common cause with the bosses, and will be much more frightened by and threatened by what they regard as spongers, people encroaching on this little island of wealth. So there's no guarantees with the unions, but if the unions still represent something like a social movement and a cause, then I think it's that sense of solidarity, being in it together, and having a political purpose that is antagonistic to capitalism, that is solidaristic and egalitarian, that kind of works against fascist penetration. So that's one of the factors. In terms of the poor, the people at the very bottom,
it's the other side of that dynamic. They don't have the anxiety of dropping lower on some level, or that somebody's coming to get what is theirs.
Yeah, and also I think that there's research showing that people are more likely to give money to charity or give money to the homeless if they're at the very bottom end of the income spectrum. I mean, I think in a way, not being incorporated into capitalism and its regular structures kind of means that your ordinary, I guess what some might call your baseline communism, your ordinary impulses towards human solidarity have not been overridden. So I think there's an element of that.
You're more connected to your humanity. You're more connected to, and perhaps the cheap politics of domination are less appealing to you in that regard.
Yeah, I think that's a big part of it. I don't want to romanticize any group of people like, the salt of the earth. There certainly are people in that group who can be drawn to far-right politics. And having grown up in Northern Ireland in Protestant communities, I've met some of these people. The kinds of people who join loyalist death squads and what have you. But yeah, I mean, in general, there's a kind of resistance to it. And it's worth knowing that that's the case. I would have said until fairly recently that I would have thought the very rich would have too much, rationality in terms of their long-term interests. to want to believe in this kind of politics. They might use it instrumentally. And I think in fairness, the American bourgeoisie, capitalist class, whatever we call it, has rallied very hard behind the Democrats. In terms, that's where the money is going. They didn't particularly want Trump in. But you do see sectors of big capital now, not just the outliers, but Silicon Valley now sort of gravitating towards Trump. I think we've seen elements of that take place in India, Hungary, other places where the far right have gained power.
I want to just get briefly to the antidote, but I do want to touch on your inclusion of a chapter in what's happening in Gaza. Like how, from a contextualize that for us. Like why these are ideas obviously that you've been thinking about, I would imagine, for some time, but why did what's going on in Gaza, this slaughter there, genocide, different people can use different words for it, but how does that fit in this context?
When I was started writing the book, I thought Israel would be a bit player. I could talk about the pogroms in the West Bank. I could talk a little bit about the history of Zionism and its ethno-nationalist politics, actually. But I didn't think I'd be talking much about it. But then, of course, the genocide began on the 8th of October, and it was loudly and brashly announced. This is what we're going to do. We're going after human animals. It's a myth that there are any civilians in there who didn't know, that kind of thing. Nobody is innocent. We need to use nuclear weapons. Actually, I mean, the rhetoric is even more extreme whenever I looked into it than I had thought. And across the board, from politicians, journalists, rabbis, military leaders, genocidal incitement and exhortation everywhere. So I couldn't not include this. I knew that there were certain factors about Israel that make it unique and distinctive. As a settler colonial project, it has certain dynamics that don't apply if you're in Hungary or Italy, for example. So, a lot of people, when they look at the Israeli far right, would say, well, we can track it back to, for example, the 1967 war, the triumphalism emerging from that, the new territory, and the messianic settler movement. But actually, I looked at it and I thought there are aspects of this too that are very similar to what we've seen elsewhere. One of them is that you have the downfall of a post-war kind of national social democratic utopia, bought in Israel's case on the back of the Nakba, the ethnic cleansing of 1948. And you have the rise of a new right, which is anti-union, anti-labor, anti-socialist, blames socialism for economic failures. You have the economic crisis of the 1970s. You have a drastic shift towards neoliberalism coming off the back of that. And you have increasing inequality. The Labour Party, we talked about maybe not, we haven't talked in this context about social democracy, but that's one of the bigger factors, is the decline of social democracy. Social democratic parties like Labour in the UK, SDP in Germany, Socialist Party in France, and so on, their decline has created the space in which this neo-far right politics can grow. In Israel, Labour barely exists anymore, having dominated the scene in the post-war period. They've been absolutely, their last hurrah was the Oslo process, and for various reasons that was scuppered, that's gone. So I think that you can look at these patterns of a right-wing trajectory, an increasingly unequal society, the pathologies of neoliberalism, and actually increasingly pessimistic society, a society where the majority don't really believe the future is going to be any better for their children than it was for them or their parents. I see that in Britain. I think we see that in France. We see it, increasingly across, particularly across Euro-America. So that deep pessimism and sense of despair fuels and feeds into ethnic nationalism, particularly where there isn't a serious, organized alternative.
I mean, even I guess the irony is, I mean, at least in the context of this country, the this notion of a climate catastrophe, aside from the one we just witnessed, the massive one we just witnessed in LA, but just sort of like the broad idea of it is creates the anxiety even amongst those of part of the party that deny its reality. And I guess that's the, broadly the theme of what you're writing here is these illusions that supplant real anxieties or that cover up real anxieties so that the solutions provided no way infringe upon those generally capitalist entities that are creating these anxieties. Job loss, insecurity, the commodification of necessities of life, the commodification of the health of the planet, et cetera, et cetera. So what is the, to the extent that there is one, what is the antidote?
Okay, so you were just talking about, the way in which people respond to job losses, ecological crisis, and so on. Quite often, I would say, with a feeling of being overwhelmed, apathetic, unable to do anything about it. There's a pretty good book by Renee Lertzman, who is an environmental psychoanalyst, who basically found in her fieldwork that lots of people who express apathy when you first talk to them, it turns out that they're carrying around an unprocessed mourning for ecological destruction. They recognize it, they register it, they don't want to deal with it. And so they say, I don't care about that. What changes this kind of frozen state of melancholia into something more productive? I think, frankly, the starting point is getting together and finding a common interest. And that can, Marxists have long talked about this dialectic where you begin by organizing around something like an immediate material interest, like your wages or your house price, rent, whatever. And by working together, you find gradually that you have a need for one another. And that's a radical need, the need for community. And you often find historically that when unions went on strike, they did so despite losing income. They were striking to defend their union, and that mattered more. Marx made fun of the economists, the English economists who didn't understand this. And the most radical need, I think, that Marx identified, the one that can come into existence through this process, is the need for universality. You come out, having defended yourself, having fought for your own interests, having found a power in community, thinking, I don't want anyone to go through this. I don't want anyone to suffer this kind of injustice or any kind of injustice. And I belong to the whole human race. For me, I have experienced forms of solidarity in my life in political parties and, what have you. I volunteer at a local church, and every week people go down and work to help refugees, and they bring stuff that they've made, give up their free time. They don't have to do it. Nobody's forcing them to do it. But the point is that in that context, it's much easier to believe in a society based on equality and justice. If your daily life is basically capitalism and nothing but capitalism, which is basically nothing but competition, nothing but everybody around you as a competitor, an enemy, they could stick the knife in, you can't trust anyone, and also a world that doesn't really make any sense because we're not giving the information to make it make sense. If that's all you've got, then it's very hard to believe in alternatives. And no wonder you turn to vengeance. No wonder you turn to what really is impotent lashing out. Demonstrations of omnipotence that amount to nothing but bloodshed. But if you have experienced the chance to be effectual, and I think that's one of the big problems, people do not feel effectual. They don't feel they have any sense of agency. Look at those MRAs and incels. When Trump was elected, they started saying things like, your body, my choice forever. Right. They're saying this to women, right? This pathetic display, I think, is typical of the kind of men's rights activists grappling after some sense of their own power and agency in the deluded form of misogyny. And they're very dangerous. Just calling them delusional doesn't mean that they won't actually act on this and so on. But the point is, I think a lot of people feel this paralysis in their lives. And they're right to feel it because the system is set up to shut you out and stop you from organizing. So I think we need to feel a sense of empowerment by organizing together, and we need to have wins. Sometimes it doesn't even have to be a major win, but we need to experience a victory, because the kind of constant message of the system is there's no alternative. You can't do anything for yourself. And they need you not to be able to experience your own potential power. So that would be the alternative, I would say.
What does that look like in sort of like in concrete terms? And I should say, like, the guy who specifically, was pushing that your body, my choice. It's his audience that we're talking to. He's got his own, I think, very specific battles that he's fighting in his mind about his sexuality, and this I think is a head fake, if you were. But the audience that might be receptive to that, those are the people that, to the extent that there's an opportunity to, at the very least, peel off some of that cohort and put them in a different direction. But what does that look like concretely? Like, how, like, when you say organize, like, what does that mean for in the daily life of people and get a win?
Absolutely. So in terms of organizing, I think on the left, people tend to talk about it as if it means like spreadsheets and phone calls and all the rest of it. I think of organizing, I think of the Bernie Sanders campaign, for example. I think in the UK of the Corbyn experience, it wasn't just about signing up as a member of a party or whatever. It was about the kind of exuberant passion that led to people packing meeting halls and vibrantly debating political ideas and feeling a sense that they could actually do something. It was about people knocking doors, and trying to change the future of the country. Bernie Sanders, what was his big sort of phrase he kept repeating? If we stand together. And, it could sound like a cliche, but coming from him, it wasn't a cliche because he meant it. He was inviting people into the improbable adventure of getting together to change the country fundamentally. And I think what we're missing, well, obviously we need a lot of things that we don't have. I think we need a much stronger labor movement for sure, but I don't think that's going to be enough. I think we need some sort of expression at the national political level. In the UK, I know that we're missing a party of the radical left. I think that's what manifestly is required. There are hundreds of thousands of people who recently were members of the Labour Party because they supported Jeremy Corbyn. They wanted to do something about it, and now they're not members of anything. And they haven't changed their mind. It's not that they don't have the politics. Give people a way to federate their will effectively, to pull it together, and also by creating a party, one also creates a very important node of communication. Parties in the kind of ecosphere of political organizing are great generalists. They connect up with one single issue campaigns, with environmental campaigns, whatever. So that would be.
But what is it? What's a version of that is bottom up? I mean, because I can't will another Bernie Sanders figure as much as I would like to, and that's not incumbent upon me. And as opposed to the idea of waiting for that figure, sitting in my home wherever I am across the country or anywhere else. What can I do in a concrete fashion that begins to sort of like do this thing? Like if I don't have a campaign that somebody else is waging it to join, how do I how do we generate that type of organization or do that organization, I guess?
Absolutely. I mean, that's kind of what a party is for, so that when you don't have the charismatic leader, you have a machinery that is also a memory, and that connects people who can be involved in this or that campaign. So I know, for example, in Los Angeles, the Democratic Socialists of America have been campaigning on housing and rent controls for a long, long time. And they don't, they struggle with it because it's very difficult to achieve any political change. But the point is, you're meeting people, you're talking to people on the doorstep, and you're setting certain thresholds for relative success. Okay, so you want to achieve something, even if you can't achieve the main goal, you can achieve something interim. You can talk to so many people, and frankly, a lot of the work that's involved in organizing, I found the wins tend to come. They tend to come cumulatively later on down the line. So, for example, we had the Stop the War movement in the UK, biggest social movement we ever had. The wins from that, we didn't stop the Iraq War.
Right.
The wins were experienced 10 years later when they refused to vote to go and bomb Syria, and when it became controversial to support a British involvement in a war, and it changed the culture fundamentally. So I think to some extent it's about building up, organizational capacity and preparation for moments of crisis, opportunity, whatever. Partly it's about applying pressure that you're going to see the results of it further down the line. But also, I kind of hear what you're saying. I think also we need jam today. We need some wins today. It seems obvious that the kinds of campaigns that are most likely to get wins today, even though it's incredibly difficult, are the campaigns that are happening around the trade unions in America, like in Amazon and so on. And we have some of that happening here in the UK too. I think that, but it might also be a rent strike campaign. It might be a campaign over the privatization of a local utility or something like that. I don't want to be too prescriptive because I think what's important is that people get a sense of the fact that they have some collective power. And also, really importantly, that they have a sense of historical belonging and historical memory, because otherwise we're floating around, we have no reference, we keep repeating the wheel, reinventing the wheel, keep trying to do things that have already been done much more effectively, or forgetting lessons from past situations that we should be remembering now. So I think that's another sort of benefit from being in an organization. You can get a much larger sense of your life and your person and the dilemmas that you go through. Otherwise, you're thrashing about impotently with no understanding of what's happening to you. I've talked about the disasters that happen in people's lives. If you have no means of analyzing, why is this happening to me? Talk about the incels. Why am I lonely? Why does nobody want to talk to me? Well, there may be reasons for that have to do with their particular personalities or behavior or whatever. Maybe they're angry, misogyny is putting people off, etc. But let's say that that's a symptom of a deeper problem, which is that social life is becoming a lot more lonely, a lot more isolated over the years. It would be useful to be able to understand that in terms of the way in which our social life is being commodified. For example, by the social industry, social media platforms, that kind of thing. And the ways in which dating life is being commodified and turning it into like a horrible experience. And we're being denied the kind of ordinary life skills that we used to have to develop, with the help of friends, parents, and what have you. We're being denied that. It's being black boxed, and instead we're being encouraged to rely on these technologies. And no wonder we're clueless. So I think, an organization where people can thrash out these things and learn about themselves and their history, give you a sense of empowerment much better than anything you get from Andrew Tate fandom.
Yeah, I mean, I think, in the wake of the financial crisis, I remember interviewing Jessica Bruder, who had written Nomad Land, which was basically an ethnography of people who had lost their homes in the financial crisis. And her hearing time after time that each person thought it was their own individual sort of like shortcomings that led them into this situation, even though there were millions of people that they were seeing around in their same situation. And the idea that we are, I think people understand it in the context of sort of like capitalist vocabulary, but the idea of like networking, when people network, it's not because they think they're going to get a job tomorrow from the networking, but they're building a network. And on some level, we need to do the same thing for social movements. Richard Seymour, writer and commentator, author of Disaster Nationalism, The Downfall of Liberal Civilization. We'll put a link to that at majority.fm and in our podcast and YouTube description. Thanks so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. All
right, folks, we're going to take a quick break. Head into the so-called
fun half.
Fun half. Yes. The new year, folks, 2025. Still the same amount of fun.
Oh, yeah. We're consistent.
Yep. Folks, it's your support that keeps this show a-rockin'. You can become a member of the Majority Report at jointhemajorityreport.com. When you do, you not only get the free show free of commercials, but you also get the fun half. And you can call us. Kowalski from Nebraska says, it's nice when the first half of the show runs a half hour long. I feel like a good chunk of the audience can't emotionally handle the so-called fun half for an hour and a half in this climate. Yeah. I don't know what that means, but fair enough.
Because we're having it in if we get to 1:30, wait, no, it'd have to be 1:15.
Yeah, the fun half is actually going to be less of a half than the first half. Whatever. Sometimes we screw up the clock. You can become a member, jointhemajorityreport.com. Also, don't forget, justcoffee.coop, fair trade coffee, and hot chocolate. Use the coupon code MAJORITY, get 10% off. Emma.
Oh, also, are those hats back on shop.majorityreportradio.com, Bradley? Are those hats back up?
Did we sell out of the Emma Majority Report?
They were sold out, but now they're back, I believe. Emma Majority Report hats. Look at that.
I complained to Julia. I was like, wait a second. How come we don't have any Majority Report hats with that?
With the charcoal?
Yeah.
Because that's what I asked for. So
I know, that was smart.
You can still get them. And Majority Report
Maybe
hats.
Like a slate blue would be good too.
Oh.
You know what? That hat doesn't even look as good as it does in real person.
In person, it looks good.
Oh, this is a sweet hat.
I agree.
That's the one I'm wearing around these days.
I feel weird wearing it, but other people.
No, yeah, it is weird.
Yeah.
You wearing your own that's why I like wearing yours.
Well, I feel like my parents would actually like these hats, but I don't want to give it to them because I don't really want them wearing it either. That's even too close. It still feels too narcissistic. But anyway, you guys should wear them. Not youtube.com/ESPN show. Shop.majorityreportradio.com. But on ESPN today, Bradley and I will be talking about the playoff games, the advancing. We have the AFC matchups, and then we're waiting on tonight for the NFC. But we'll also talk about Mike McCarthy hitting free agency and the head coaching carousel. YouTube.com/ESPN show.
And Left Reckoning, we did a reading series for our patrons on Sunday. We read the Declaration of Principles of the Social Democratic Party, which came out in 1898. So check that out, patreon.com/Left Reckoning.
All right, folks, see you in the fun half.
You are in for it.
All right, folks, 646-257-3920. See you in the fun half.
Oh, no. Are you ready?
Who sent us this?
Anarchy. Alpha males are back. Boy is back. And the alpha males are back.
Just as delicious as you could imagine.
The alpha males are back. Boy is back. And the alpha males are back.
Just wanna degrade the white man.
Alpha males are back.
I take all of it in my throat.
Alpha males are back.
Snowflake says what?
The alpha males are back.
You are a madman.
And the alpha males are back.
Oh no, Sam Seder! What a fucking nightmare!
Bring back DJ Danner.
Yeah, or a couple of them. Just put them in rotation.
DJ Danner.
Well, the problem with those is they're like 45 seconds long, so I don't know if they're enough of a break.
That's fucking nonsense. See white people doing drugs, they look worse than normal white people, and all white people look disgusting.
And the alpha males,
psych, fuck them. Snowflake says what? Snowflake says what?
A hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank. Okay, I'm making stupid money. Hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank. All lives matter.
Have you tried doing an impression on a college campus?
I think that there's no reason why reasonable people across the divide can't all agree with this. Psych.
And the alpha males are back, 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 back. And the Africans are black, 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 black African. And the alpha males are black, 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 black. And the Africans are back, 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 back.
When you see Donald Trump out there, doesn't a little part of you think that America deserves to be taken over by jihadists? Keeping it 100. Can't knock the hustle. Come on, fuck 'em, fuck 'em. Things I do for the bigger game plan. By the way, it's my birthday. Happy birthday to me, Jew boy. I have a thought experiment for you.
And the alpha males are back, back. Africans are black, black. Alpha males are black, black. Africans are back, back.
Come on. Come on. Come on. Someone needs to pay the price for blasphemy around here.
I am a total pussy, 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 pussy.
Jesus.
We were just saying how Trump's
Very
getting
fitting.
inaugurated on MLK Day.
That's what he would have wanted.
This is. Yeah, Michael would have had just a field day with right-wing MLK with this. I've never been
Finally, some masculinity.
so proud. Donald Trump.
He says what he feels.
Like my brother from a different mother.
Oh.
For years, I dreamed of a Donald Trump presidency. What an honor.
Carrie Underwood will be performing the national anthem.
I don't know who that is.
American Idol winner. Unfortunately, a good one. But I remember her husband.
2020 or 2006.
Oh, at its peak. But her husband's a hockey player who went on Candace Owens, so it seems in keeping with their politics.
These clips, I've seen a couple of these clips. They're awesome. Hassan Piker went out. He lives in L.A. Is he okay?
He's okay, I think.
I don't know where in L.A. he lives. I've never been invited. So
To his house?